Good morning, Endeavour, and a very happy Wednesday to you. Well, I have to tell you, I've just been flicking through this next chapter of Our Fire Thief, and boy, are things hotting up. You rejoin us on chapter 17, where Jim, Uncle Edward, and poor Theus are about to start this show. We know that the mayor is in on it, and he's going to be having some of the share of the robbery from Mucklethrift Manor. Chapter 17, the drawing room at Mucklethrift Manor, 7 o'clock. I hope you're as excited as I was then. Doing a show always made me nervous. Would I forget my lines? Then there was the robbery afterwards. Would I be caught? But now I had Mayor Walter Weed on to worry about. Would he betray us? Would he catch us out when we tried to single cross him? And I was still dazed at the thought of meeting a Greek titan, Theus, and of seeing the awesome Zeus. What do you do when your mind is a whirlpool? Swim in one stroke at a time? Get through the show first. The drawing room smelled of cigar smoke and perfume. A fire blazed in the huge hearth, and Theus looked miserable. Theus didn't give fire to humans so they could make cigars and pipes. Human beings are clever creatures, that's why Theus loved them. But there are some humans who are stupid, and they choose to set fire to tobacco weeds. Maybe clever humans should go around with buckets of water and pour them over the smoke suckers. The singing lady stopped her screeching and the audience clapped. I think they were being kind. Mayor Walter Tweed jumped onto the low platform where our coffin lay on the table. Behind the coffin was a magic lantern, and I slipped behind the mayor to turn up the wick on the lamp. A picture of a gloomy house was thrown onto the white sheet which hung behind it. The picture would change from time to time as we told the story of the uncle. Mayor Tweed smiled a weaselly smile and spoke some weaselly words to the rich folk gathered in the room. "Oh, Mrs. Popplewhite, thank you so much for your delightful song. I think we all agree we've never heard anything like it." The people in the audience murmured that they had indeed never heard anything like it. Maybe if they'd worked in a butcher's shop they'd have heard something like her singing, the sound of a pig being killed maybe, but the people in the room didn't look like the sort who killed pigs. "Now, Mayor Weed went on. I really must stop calling him Weed, but I can't help myself. It's like going into a salon where there's a brass spittoon in the corner and a sign saying, 'Please do not spit on the floor.' You know you shouldn't do it, but you just can't help yourself spitting on the floor, can you? I'll bet you've spat on the floor dozens of times, so don't blame me for my little wickedness with Weed." "Now," Mayor Weed went on, "it is my huge pleasure, my honour, my privilege, to introduce our next guests. They are Mr. Edward Slaughter and his nephew, Little Jim." Suddenly he tilted his head to one side and asked, "What do we get if we take the S from slaughter?" "Laughter," Mr. Mucklethrift said from the front row. Mayor Tweed shook his head, a little annoyed that his joke had been killed. "We get laughter," he explained, "laughter and tears from these masters of dramatic art." He then launched into a speech that took 10 minutes about how he'd gone to school with Uncle Edward and what a young star my uncle had been in those days. It was all lies, but Mayor Tweed was a politician, and lying was what he did best. At last he stepped down from the platform and left us to it. The butler turned down the gas lamps in the room. Our ancient wooden chest lay on the table looking into the black shadows. The only light came from the oil lamp in the magic lantern and flames from the fire. I pushed the slide to change the picture. We now saw a view inside a gloomy house shown in the last picture. On the dining room wall was a portrait of a pale but lovely woman. I looked at her and snivelled. "Mamma, my dear sweet mamma." "Ah," the audience sighed, and I knew they would sob and dribble over our sad tale. Uncle Edward turned to me, his eyes rolling, showing the whites of his eyes like some horse with a bad belly. Then his character, a cruel, cold old man, told me the story of my poor parents. Uncle Edward had loved my mother, he said, but she'd married his brother, my father, instead. Then my father disappeared mysteriously and they never found his body, but Mamma knew who had killed him and she died of misery, as you would. Uncle rested his hand on the long black box. He hooked a finger at me. "Come here. You've often tried to open this chest. It has a secret spring. The touch is known to me alone." He pressed the button on the end of the box and I stepped back, waiting for the lid to spring open. Nothing happened. Uncle rolled his eyes a little bit more and cried, "It has a secret spring. The touch is known to me alone," and he pressed the button harder. Nothing happened. As I leaned close to the old chest, I placed a hand on my back of my neck and pulled me so hard so his mouth was next to my ear and his thick black beard tickled my neck and his voice hissed in my ear. "I thought I told you to oil the bleeding lock, Jim." I did, I squeaked. "Give it a kick, Uncle Ed." He pulled back his thin grey grease paint lips and showed me his gleaming white teeth in a snarl framed by a thick brown beard. He held my head over the chest. "It has a secret spring. The touch is known to me alone," he roared and booted the switch. The lid sprang up and smacked me in the nose, as he meant it to. There was a gasp from one of the ladies in the room, though I swear I heard some of the men beginning to chuckle. Slowly, on a spring, a skeleton rose from the coffin and sat up. A woman screamed. There's always one. While I wiped the blood off my nose, Uncle Edward turned to fix the audience with a glare. They fell silent. "What do you see that you groan so heavily?" he asked me and pushed my head towards the open chest. I snivelled, swallowing blood. "What do you see that you groan so heavily?" he repeated. I groaned. He pointed to the box. "The thing is just a bare-ribbed skeleton," he said in a sneering voice. "Papa!" I wailed, but with a nose full of blood it sounded more like rhubarb. I staggered away from the hideous skeleton towards the table. There I pushed the slide on the magic lantern and the picture changed to a gruesome ghost. Uncle Edward fixed his gaze on the glowing shape and gave a terrifying cry. "Oh, it's my brother returned from the grave!" He fell to the floor in a swoon. I stood over the trembling form and recited my closing lines. That night they laid him on his bed, in raving madness tossed. He gnashed his teeth with wild oaths and he cursed the Holy Ghost. Before the light of morning broke a sinister soul we lost. And with a gurgle in his throat, Uncle Edward died for the first time that night. There was a hush and then the butler turned up the gas lamps. The 30 or so ladies and gentlemen burst into cheering and applause. I smiled shyly, but they didn't seem to see me because Uncle Edward jumped up from his deathbed and stood in front of me and spread his arms wide. "Thank you, my friends, thank you, you are too kind." The audience rose from the fine chairs embroidered in green and gold and cried, "Bravo!" When the applause finally died down, Uncle Edward said, "And that concludes the first part of tonight's show. I beg your patience while my assistant removes the old chest." He waved at Theus, who stepped forward and picked up the coffin and carried it to the door. "Thank you for being such a wonderful audience. Remember, if you see an old locked chest, then don't be surprised if you find a corpse inside it." The audience laughed and moved to the sideboard where the servants held trays of champagne and small plates of food. Mr. George Mucklethrift stepped towards Uncle Edward. He was even fatter than Uncle, and his eyes disappeared into slits of fat around his balloon face. "A triumph, Mr. Slaughter, a triumph. The best night's entertainment I think we've ever had in our parlour." Too kind, Uncle said. "After your break I will recite the burial of Sir John Moore after Corunna," he went on. The fat factory owner frowned. "We don't want to keep my guests from their dinners," he said. 10 minutes, Uncle Edward said. He caught my eye and repeated it. 10 minutes, not a second more, not a second less. He pulled out the watch in his waistcoat pocket. It was 7:20 now. "Your guests will go to dinner at 7:30. I understood. The ticking of the clock in the hall would tell me when my time was up. I slipped out to rob the house. I didn't know then that this would be our last robbery. Ever. Endeavour. I'll see you all tomorrow.